Welcome, weary traveler, to a quiet corner of history, a place where the echoes of the past can gently lull you into a state of deep calm. Tonight, we journey back to a city on the cusp of profound change, a place of cobbled streets and whispered hopes, of simmering discontent and the scent of baking bread, or the lack thereof. We're going to drift into the chaotic whispers of 18th century Paris, a city poised on the brink of a new world, a world that would forever alter the course of nations. Close your eyes, if you wish, and allow your mind to wander through the narrow alleyways and grand boulevards of a time long past. We'll explore the mounting tensions that eventually led to the thunderous fall of an ancient fortress, the everyday struggles of a people yearning for a different life, and the quiet tremors that began to reshape a nation from its very foundations. There is no urgency here, no need to rush, just the steady, unhurried unfolding of a story designed to guide you towards tranquility and, perhaps, towards the gentle embrace of sleep. Our journey begins not in the gilded halls of power, but on the cold, damp streets, in the crowded tenements, and within the churning stomachs of the common people of Paris. Let us begin our descent into the daily realities of a life that, for many, was a constant struggle. Imagine yourself, if you will, not as a casual observer, but as a resident of Paris in the late 1780s. The morning light, often filtered by the smoky haze of countless hearths, struggles to penetrate the narrow openings of your cramped dwelling. Perhaps you live in a multi-story building, an immobile where families are packed in, floor upon floor, each level slightly less desirable, slightly darker than the one above. The air inside is thick with the lingering sense of last night's meager meal, the dampness of linen hung to dry, and the ever-present, subtle aroma of humanity crowded into small spaces. As you stir from a fitful sleep on a straw mattress, perhaps shared with several family members, the first sensation that greets you is likely the persistent gnawing of hunger. It's a familiar ache, a dull background thrum to daily existence. Bread, the very staff of life, is not just food. It is currency, it is survival. And its price, in these waning years of the Ancien Regime, has become an unbearable burden. Stepping out onto the street, the sounds of early morning Paris begin to filter in. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of a cart over uneven cobblestones, the calls of street vendors already hawking their limited wares. The air itself feels different. It carries the mingled smells of wood smoke, of damp earth from overflowing gutters, and the faint, sweet-sour scent of refuse that collects in corners despite the efforts of a rudimentary sanitation system. Your destination, like that of countless others, is likely the market. As you navigate the winding, often muddy streets, you observe the faces around you. They are etched with a weariness that goes beyond simple fatigue. There is a lean hunger in their eyes, a certain sharpness born of constant scarcity. Children, many of them thin and pale, play in the grime, their games a stark contrast to the serious expressions of their elders. Arriving at the market, the scene is a cacophony of sights and sounds, yet beneath the surface, a tension hums. The most vital stall, the baker's, is often the most crowded. Here, the true measure of desperation is revealed. A single loaf of bread, often black and coarse, costs an exorbitant sum, a sum that can consume a laborer's entire day's wages, sometimes even more. Imagine working from dawn till dusk, your body aching, your spirit weary, only to find that your efforts barely suffice to put a single, inadequate loaf on the table for your family. This is not a hypothetical hardship. It is the daily reality for hundreds of thousands of Parisians. Consider the ripple effect of such a price. If bread consumes all, what is left for other necessities? For fuel to warm a freezing tenement in the biting Parisian winter? For medicine when disease inevitably strikes? For clothing to protect against the elements? The answer for many is simply nothing. The winter months are particularly cruel. The chill penetrates the thin walls of your home, and without sufficient firewood or charcoal, warmth becomes a luxury, a distant dream. Illness, from common colds to more severe fevers and infections, spreads like wildfire through the densely packed communities, often exacerbated by malnutrition and poor hygiene. Death, particularly among infants and the elderly, is an all too common visitor. The feeling of injustice hangs heavy in the air, as palpable as the morning mist. You hear murmurs, quiet grumbles, then louder complaints. Stories circulate of royal extravagance, of lavish feasts at Versailles, of aristocrats untouched by the suffering that defines your existence. These tales, whether entirely true or embellished by rumor, fuel a growing resentment. You see the well-dressed carriages of the wealthy, their occupants oblivious to the daily struggles unfolding around them, and a bitter taste rises in your mouth. Life is a constant, grinding struggle against the elements, against illness, and most acutely, against the relentless pangs of hunger. The rhythm of your days is dictated by the endless pursuit of sustenance, the desperate hope that tomorrow will somehow be better, even as today offers little comfort. The sounds of the street, once a mere backdrop, now seem to carry a restless undertone, a low hum of collective desperation. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and human exertion, also seems to vibrate with an unspoken question. How much longer can this continue? It is within this world of scarcity and simmering resentment, where the simplest loaf of bread holds the power of life and death, that the seeds of revolution are quietly, almost imperceptibly, being sown. The quiet desperation we just explored, the gnawing hunger, the ever-present injustice, these were not isolated feelings. They were shared, woven into the very fabric of Parisian life. And as the spring of 1789 turned into a tense summer, these individual grievances began to coalesce, to find a collective voice, however quiet at first. The murmurs grew louder, gathering momentum like a slow-moving river swelling after a long rain. Imagine, for a moment, the atmosphere in the Parisian streets in the days leading up to mid-July. The air is thick not only with the usual city smells but also with anticipation, with an almost palpable sense of unease. There are gatherings, small at first, then larger, in the Palais Royal Gardens, a place where people can speak more freely, away from the immediate gaze of royal authority. Orators, often self-appointed, stand on tables, their voices rising above the hum of the crowd, speaking of rights, of liberty, of the dire need for change. Pamphlets, crudely printed but passionately worded, are passed from hand to hand, their messages of reform and defiance igniting sparks of hope in weary hearts. News travels slowly, but it travels. The Estates General, a centuries-old assembly representing the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, had been convened by King Louis XVI, a desperate measure to address the kingdom's crushing financial crisis. But the commoners, the Third Estate, had felt ignored, their pleas for equitable representation dismissed. Their bold declaration of themselves as the National Assembly, a body truly representing the will of the people, had sent tremors through the established order. Then, on July 11th, a development that truly ignited the volatile mixture of hope and resentment. Jacques Necker, the popular finance minister, widely seen as a supporter of reform and a friend to the common people, was dismissed by the king. The news spread like wildfire, carried by agitated crowds through the streets. To many, this was a clear sign that the monarchy intended to suppress the nascent aspirations for change, to crush the spirit of the National Assembly. Fear mixed with outrage. The city began to stir in earnest. Crowds swelled. People poured out of their homes, from their workshops, from their markets. They gathered in public squares, their faces grim, their voices rising in a collective lament that soon transformed into a roar of defiance. There was a desperate search for arms, for anything that could be used to defend themselves, to defend what they felt was their burgeoning liberty. Swords, pikes, old muskets, anything was seized upon. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. On the morning of July 14, 1789, the focus of this simmering unrest turned towards a formidable, imposing structure that loomed on the eastern side of Paris, the Bastille. For centuries, the Bastille had served as a royal prison, its thick stone walls and 8 towers a silent, stark symbol of the king's absolute power and his ability to arbitrarily imprison anyone who displeased him. Though it housed only a handful of prisoners at this time, its symbolic weight was immense. It represented the oppressive past, the tyranny from which the people yearned to be free. The crowd that converged upon the Bastille was a diverse tapestry of Parisian society. Ordinary citizens, artisans, shopkeepers, some disgruntled soldiers. They came seeking gunpowder and arms, believing these were stored within its walls, but more profoundly, they came to confront a symbol. Initially, their intent was to negotiate with the Bastille's governor, Bernard-René de Launay, for the surrender of the arms and the fortress itself. The physical destruction of the Bastille began almost immediately, a cathartic act of tearing down the old order. Stone by stone, the hated symbol was dismantled, its very bricks becoming souvenirs, talismans of a new era. The true significance of July 14th was not in the military might displayed, but in the powerful message it sent. The fall of the Bastille echoed across France, and indeed across Europe. It was a clear, unmistakable declaration that the power of the monarchy was no longer absolute. The people had acted, and in doing so, they had dramatically shifted the balance. It was the moment when the whispers of liberty transformed into a roar, a symbolic earthquake that shook the foundations of the ancien regime to their very core, signaling the true, if tumultuous, beginning of the French Revolution. From this day forward, nothing in France would ever truly be the same. Eventually, after several hours, Governor de Launay surrendered. The main drawbridge was lowered, and the furious crowd surged inside. The fall of the Bastille was not a meticulously planned military victory, but rather a spontaneous eruption of popular will, fueled by hunger, injustice, and a newfound sense of empowerment. The governor was seized and, tragically, killed by the enraged mob. The few prisoners found within its walls, for common criminals, 2 madmen, and a nobleman imprisoned for a minor transgression were released, though their liberation was almost an afterthought to the symbolic triumph. The events that followed were chaotic, marked by confusion and desperate bravery. Drawbridges were lowered, perhaps accidentally, perhaps deliberately. The crowd poured into the outer courtyards. The small contingent of soldiers and Swiss guards within the fortress, already dispirited and outnumbered, found themselves in an untenable position. The fighting was not a grand battle, but a desperate struggle, marked by individual acts of courage and desperation on both sides. Imagine the scene: thousands of people milling outside, their shouts echoing against the cold stone, the air thick with tension and the smell of fear and anticipation. Negotiations were slow, fraught with misunderstanding and suspicion. Suddenly, shots rang out. Whether accidental or deliberate, the sound ignited the powder keg. The crowd, already on edge, surged forward. The events that followed were chaotic, marked by confusion and desperate bravery. Drawbridges were lowered, perhaps accidentally, perhaps deliberately. The crowd poured into the outer courtyards. The small contingent of soldiers and Swiss guards within the fortress, already dispirited and outnumbered, found themselves in an untenable position. The fighting was not a grand battle, but a desperate struggle, marked by individual acts of courage and desperation on both sides. Eventually, after several hours, Governor de Launay surrendered. The main drawbridge was lowered, and the furious crowd surged inside. The fall of the Bastille was not a meticulously planned military victory, but rather a spontaneous eruption of popular will, fueled by hunger, injustice, and a newfound sense of empowerment. The governor was seized and, tragically, killed by the enraged mob. The few prisoners found within its walls, for common criminals, 2 madmen, and a nobleman imprisoned for a minor transgression were released, though their liberation was almost an afterthought to the symbolic triumph. The physical destruction of the Bastille began almost immediately, a cathartic act of tearing down the old order. Stone by stone, the hated symbol was dismantled, its very bricks becoming souvenirs, talismans of a new era. The true significance of July 14th was not in the military might displayed, but in the powerful message it sent. The fall of the Bastille echoed across France, and indeed across Europe. It was a clear, unmistakable declaration that the power of the monarchy was no longer absolute. The people had acted, and in doing so they had dramatically shifted the balance. It was the moment when the whispers of liberty transformed into a roar, a symbolic earthquake that shook the foundations of the ancien regime to their very core, signaling the true, if tumultuous, beginning of the French Revolution. From this day forward, nothing in France would ever truly be the same. The fall of the Bastille, as we've explored, was a pivotal moment, a thunderclap signaling the dawn of a new era. But beyond its symbolic significance as a prison of royal tyranny, what was the Bastille? What secrets did its imposing walls truly hold? And what became of them once the fortress itself began to crumble? Let us gently peel back the layers of myth and history to uncover the reality of this ancient structure. Originally, the Bastille Saint-Antoine, to give it its full name, was not intended as a prison at all. Its origins stretch back to the late 14th century, when it was conceived as a fortress, a formidable defensive work designed to protect the eastern entrance of Paris, particularly the royal residence of the Hôtel Saint-Paul, from potential attack during the Hundred Years' War. Imagine its purpose then. A strategic stronghold, its thick stone walls, 8 towering bastions, and deep moats built to withstand sieges. A military bulwark rather than a place of confinement. Over the centuries, as Paris expanded and its defenses shifted, the Bastille's military purpose diminished. By the 17th century, under the reign of Cardinal Richelieu, it began its transformation into a state prison. It became a place where individuals could be held by direct order of the king, often without trial, through a sealed letter known as a lettre de cachet. These letters were a potent symbol of arbitrary royal power, allowing for the swift, secret imprisonment of political enemies, religious dissidents, or even troublesome members of the nobility who had displeased the crown. However, the popular image of the Bastille as a dark, horrific dungeon overflowing with thousands of political prisoners suffering in squalid conditions is largely a product of revolutionary propaganda. While certainly a place of detention and isolation, by the late 18th century, it was not the teeming torture chamber of popular imagination. In fact, on the morning of July 14, 1789, a mere 7 prisoners were found within its vast confines. These included 4 forgers, 2 madmen whose families wished them confined, and the Comte de Salages, a young nobleman imprisoned at his family's request for monstrous crimes, which likely involved incest. Hardly the legions of political martyrs the revolutionaries later depicted. Life within the Bastille for those detained varied considerably. Some prisoners, particularly those from noble or wealthy backgrounds, were afforded relatively comfortable conditions, allowed to bring their own furniture, books, and even servants. They might dine on decent food, engage in intellectual pursuits, and even socialize with fellow prisoners under supervision. Others, however, faced much harsher realities, confined to solitary cells, suffering from the damp and the isolation. The most infamous cells were those in the deepest towers, dark and cold, though the widespread use of torture, while not unheard of in the French judicial system of the era, was not a daily routine within the Bastille itself as often sensationalized. Archaeological investigations and historical records have helped to clarify these myths. After its fall, the Bastille was systematically dismantled. The process of demolition took several years, with its stones being reused for other construction projects, notably the Pont de la Concorde. Imagine the sheer scale of this deconstruction. A massive fortress, built to last for centuries, slowly reduced to rubble by the very people it had once symbolized oppression over. Today, very little of the original Bastille remains visible on the surface. The site is now marked by the Place de la Bastille, a large public square at the intersection of several major Parisian boulevards. If you were to walk across this busy square now, you would find no towering walls or deep moats. Instead, in the center stands the July column, commemorating the July Revolution of 1830, another pivotal moment in French history, rather than the storming of the Bastille itself. However, beneath the modern city, fragments of the Bastille do persist. During the construction of the Paris metro system in the early 20th century, remnants of the fortress's foundations were uncovered. Some of these archaeological findings, including parts of a tower base, were carefully excavated and can now be seen in the square Henri Galli, a small park located near the actual site of the Bastille. There, a preserved section of one of the towers, the Tour de la Liberté, stands as a quiet, stoic reminder of what once stood on that ground. The transformation of the Bastille from a medieval fortress to a symbol of royal tyranny, and then to a pile of rubble scattered across Paris, illustrates a profound shift in the collective consciousness. It was not just a building that fell, but an idea, an old order. The secrets it held were not just those of its prisoners, but the deeper secrets of power, of arbitrary rule, and the eventual powerful triumph of a people's yearning for freedom. Its very dismantling became a powerful, physical manifestation of a nation shedding its oppressive past, brick by painstakingly removed brick. Having explored the stark realities of Parisian daily life and the symbolic thunderclap of the Bastille's fall, let us now gently shift our gaze. We move from the cramped, hungry streets of the capital to a world of almost unimaginable opulence, a place deliberately designed to isolate its inhabitants from the very struggles we've just contemplated. We journey to Versailles, the magnificent royal palace, a gilded bubble where the echoes of discontent were often muted, if heard at all. Imagine, if you will, the vast, manicured gardens of Versailles, stretching seemingly to the horizon, a triumph of human design over nature. Fountains shimmer, their waters playing intricate dances, statues gleam, and perfectly sculpted hedges create a labyrinth of green. Inside the palace, a different kind of labyrinth unfolds. Vast halls adorned with mirrors and chandeliers, chambers hung with rich tapestries, and galleries filled with the soft rustle of silk and the quiet murmur of courtly conversation. This was the world of the French aristocracy, a world meticulously constructed around the person of the king. Life at Versailles was a grand, elaborate performance, a spectacle designed to underscore the absolute power and divine right of the monarch. Every routine, every gesture, was steeped in centuries of tradition and intricate etiquette. Consider the daily awakening of the king, the lever du roi. This was not a private moment, but a carefully orchestrated public ritual. Only a select few nobles, privileged by birth or royal favor, were permitted to attend, assisting the king with his dressing, offering him his wig, his sword, his morning chocolate. It was a dizzying display of proximity to power, a constant competition for the king's attention, a fleeting glance, a word, a gesture that could make or break a career. For Queen Marie Antoinette, life was similarly governed by ritual, albeit with perhaps a touch more informality in her later years. Her days were a whirlwind of formal receptions, card games, theatrical performances, and masked balls. Her fashion choices, often extravagant and trend-setting, became a subject of both admiration and bitter resentment among a populace struggling to afford basic necessities. Her private hamlet, the Hameau de la Reine, a rustic-looking retreat within the Versailles grounds where she played at being a shepherdess, epitomized the stark disconnect between her idyllic fantasy and the grim reality beyond the palace gates. The court itself was a constant ballet of social maneuvering. Nobles, effectively compelled to live at Versailles to maintain their status and influence, spent their lives navigating a complex hierarchy, seeking royal patronage, and engaging in elaborate displays of wealth and influence. Their days revolved around appearances, around the pursuit of pleasure, around the subtle art of courtly intrigue. Discussions of philosophy and Enlightenment ideas certainly existed, often in private salons, but the pressing issues of widespread hunger and national debt often seemed a distant echo, easily drowned out by the rustle of gowns and the clink of champagne glasses. The sheer extravagance was staggering. The maintenance of the palace, the endless feasts, the elaborate entertainments, the upkeep of the royal household with its thousands of servants. All of this was funded by the taxes levied upon the very people we encountered in Segment 1. Imagine the stark contrast. A Parisian family spending their entire day's wages on a single loaf of bread, while at Versailles, tables groaned under the weight of exotic delicacies, served on porcelain and silver, enjoyed by those who had never known a moment's hunger. This stark disconnect was not merely economic. It was psychological. The nobility at Versailles, often isolated from the harsh realities of French society, lacked a fundamental understanding of the widespread suffering that was festering just a few miles away in Paris and throughout the provinces. They inhabited a golden cage, beautiful and comfortable, but ultimately a gilded prison of their own making, cut off from the rising tide of discontent. The news that reached them was often filtered, softened, or simply dismissed as the grumbling of an ungrateful populace. As the financial crisis deepened, and the whispers of revolution grew louder, the world within Versailles continued its stately, oblivious dance. The elaborate rituals, the glittering balls, the hunting parties in the royal forests, these continued even as the storm gathered outside. It was a serene, almost hypnotic existence, a world unto itself, profoundly beautiful in its design, yet tragically blind to the precipice upon which it stood. The very splendor that symbolized their power became, in the end, a testament to their isolation, a poignant portrait of a world on the brink of collapse, gently turning its back on the deluge that was about to break. And so, we gently bring our journey through revolutionary Paris to a close. We have walked the hungry streets with the common citizen, felt the simmering tension that erupted at the Bastille's gates, uncovered the surprising truths behind that infamous fortress, and finally, stepped into the golden, yet ultimately isolated, world of Versailles. From the relentless grind for a loaf of bread to the elaborate dance of courtly life, we've seen the stark contrasts that defined France on the eve of one of history's most profound transformations. The whispers of discontent grew, fueled by injustice and exacerbated by obliviousness, until they became the roaring torrent that swept away an old order. The French Revolution was not merely an event. It was a cascade of human experiences, a symphony of hope, desperation, and change, played out on the grand stage of history. As you drift now, away from the echoes of 18th century Paris and back into the quiet comfort of your present moment, perhaps you can appreciate the profound shift that occurred, the bridge between two vastly different worlds. The struggles, the symbols, the stark disparities, all have faded into the annals of time, leaving us with lessons and reflections. Let these historical murmurs gently recede now, like the last drops of a soft rain. Allow your mind to clear, your breath to deepen, and your body to relax completely. The past has receded, and only the calm of the present remains. Rest now, peacefully, as the night embraces you.